It's 11:23 p.m. on a Friday. You're on your couch. You've had 2 beers, you're watching something forgettable on TV, you're not thinking about work because it's Friday night and you've earned the right to not think about work. And your phone buzzes. Text message. Unknown number. You look at the preview. And something about it is off right away, not alarming, just off. The tone of the text is familiar. The phrasing is familiar. It reads like a message from your business partner, Connor. The casualness of it, the specific way certain words get compressed when he texts, but it's not from any of Connor's numbers. Not the cell you have. Not the office line. Some third number you've never seen. The text says, Meridian signed the renewal. Invoice goes out Tuesday under HBC. You're good for the month. You sit with that for a second. Meridian is one of your clients. One of your best clients, actually, a mid-sized property management company you'd brought on in year 2. The renewal should have gone through your company. HBC is not a name you recognize. Invoice under HBC makes no sense unless HBC is a company and not yours. You type back one thing. Who is this? 3 minutes pass. No response. And then, sorry, wrong number. Wrong number. From a number you don't have. Using your client's name. Using your partner's exact phrasing. Telling you, or rather telling whoever the intended recipient was, that an invoice is going out on Tuesday. You put the TV on mute. You sit there. And for the first time in 5 years of building something with another person, you feel the specific cold feeling that comes when you start to understand that the ground might not be as solid as you thought. You don't sleep much that night. And the next morning, Saturday early, coffee still brewing, you start looking. So let me tell you what Beacon Digital actually is, because the betrayal doesn't land right without the context. And I'm going to keep this specific because the specifics are what make this real. You and Connor started Beacon Digital in January 5 years ago. Digital marketing agency, primarily SEO, paid search, and content strategy for small to mid-sized businesses. The kind of agency that doesn't exist in most people's minds as a category because it's not glamorous, but the kind that serves a real need and, if you're good at it, grows steadily on the back of word of mouth. You were both leaving the same corporate agency where you'd worked for 4 years. You'd been colleagues, then friends, then the kind of work friendship that turns into a business idea over enough post-work drinks. The division of labor made sense from the start. You were the operator, the systems, the client management, the finances, the thing that kept the machine running clean. Connor was the pitch man, the energy in the room, the guy who got clients to sign, the face of the business in every first meeting. Neither of you was the complete package alone. Together you worked. Year 1 was hard in the way that every first year of a small business is hard. You both took less than you needed to live comfortably. You worked weekends. You lost your first 3 pitches in a row and had a genuinely rough conversation in a coffee shop in March where you talked about whether to keep going. You kept going. By December of year 1, you had 7 clients and a revenue run rate that made year 2 look survivable. Years 2 and 3 were the growth years. You moved out of the shared co-working space and into a real office, small, nothing flashy, but yours. You hired 3 people. Your client roster grew to 22. You started turning down clients who weren't a good fit, which is a very specific kind of confidence that only comes from not being scared of losing every deal. Revenue crossed $800,000 in year 3. You split the profit 50-50-50, which was the original deal and which felt right. Year 4, things plateaued a bit, not shrinking, just not growing. The way years 2 and 3 had, Connor seemed distracted. More meetings off-site that he didn't detail much. More I'm handling some external stuff explanations for absences. You filed it under partner has personal things going on and picked up the operational slack, which is what you always did when the balance shifted. You trusted him. Completely. 5 years of building something together will do that. Or it'll make you a very efficient mark. The thing with Connor, and this is the part you understand better in retrospect, is that he'd always had a higher appetite for money than you had. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way that set off alarms at the time. Just in the way some men are wired, the number was never quite enough. The agency was doing well. But Connor had an eye on what could it be while you were focused on what it is. That gap between what is and what could be is where people find rationalizations. In year 4, roughly 2 years before the Friday night text, Connor apparently found his. Saturday morning. You're still in your apartment, laptop open at the kitchen counter. You've Googled HBC and got nothing immediately relevant. So you do the next thing, you check the state business registry. It takes about 45 seconds to find. Harbor Bridge Consulting, LLC. Registered 2 years and 3 months ago. Sole member, Connor Webb. Harbor Bridge Consulting. But you've never heard that name once in 5 years. You've had thousands of conversations with Connor in the office, over lunch, on calls, in Ubers to client meetings, and he has never once mentioned a company called Harbor Bridge Consulting that he owns. You pull up the state registry's full filing. Business address, a virtual office service in your city. Registered agent, generic service company. So there's no physical trail, no real address, nothing that would show up if you looked for it casually. Someone set this up to be inconspicuous. You sit there for a while. Your brain is doing that thing it does when the implications of something keep expanding. You see one corner of the room and you know there's more behind it, but you can't fully see it yet. You know HBC is Harbor Bridge Consulting. You know Connor owns it. You know the text referenced one of your clients and an invoice going out under HBC, not Beacon. And you know that invoice shouldn't exist because Meridian is your client, yours, Beacon's. You open your CRM, your client management system where every client's account history, contract, invoicing, and communication is stored. You pull up Meridian. Their contract is in place. Their invoices are going out monthly from Beacon as they should be. Everything looks normal, completely normal. Which means that if there's a second invoice going to Meridian from HBC and the text suggests it's going somewhere separate, somewhere that isn't in your system, somewhere you'd never see unless you specifically went looking. You're a systems guy. You build Beacon's operations from scratch. You understand how billing works, how client relationships are structured, how the money moves. And as you sit at your kitchen counter on a Saturday morning with a second cup of coffee going cold, you start to understand how this could work. How someone who knew your systems and your clients, who had access to client contacts, who was trusted by those clients, could run a parallel billing operation alongside yours without you seeing it. Especially if that person managed most of the client relationships directly. Especially if that person had been handling some external stuff for 2 years. You don't call Connor. Not yet. You close the laptop. You go for a run. You need to think before you act. That's always been your way. Think first, move carefully. It's what makes you a good operator, and it's what's about to make you a very effective adversary. Okay, so let me explain what you're dealing with, because parallel invoicing sounds like it might be a small thing, and it is not. It is a very specific and very systematic kind of fraud, and the reason it works is that it's invisible from both sides unless you're specifically looking. Here's how it works. Beacon has a client. Let's use Meridian as the example since that's the one the text mentioned. Beacon provides digital marketing services. Meridian pays Beacon monthly. That's the normal relationship, above the table, in your CRM, invoiced from your business account. Harbor Bridge Consulting also has a relationship with Meridian, not instead of Beacon, alongside it. Connor has introduced HBC to Meridian as a separate consultancy offering, probably framed as complimentary service or a specialized add-on, maybe strategy consulting, maybe executive advisory, maybe something loose enough that Meridian thinks it's getting 2 different service providers for 2 different things. Or maybe, and this is the darker version, maybe Meridian doesn't fully know what they're paying for, but Connor has a relationship with their billing contact and the invoice gets approved without scrutiny. The money from HBC goes to Connor directly, not to Beacon, not into the shared P&L, to his personal business account that you've never had access to. You never see it. The client sees two separate bills but pays them both through different channels, often with different people approving each one. Now multiply Meridian by however many clients Connor manages directly. Look at your client roster, 22 clients. Connor has close relationships with 17 of them. If even a third of those relationships have a parallel HBC engagement running alongside the Beacon one, if even 6 or 7 clients are getting a second bill that never touches your books, you're talking about a significant number every month. Every month for 2 years. You don't know the exact number yet, but the math, even roughly, starts to feel like something physical. Wait. Here's what you know about Connor Webb going into the worst week of your professional life. He's genuinely good at what he does. That's the thing about Connor that makes all of this twice as hard to carry. He's not mediocre. He's talented. The reason Beacon grew was partly systems and partly Connor's ability to walk into a room full of skeptical business owners and make them believe the service was worth the investment. That's a real skill. He had it. He also has, and you see this clearly now, though you'd have pushed back on it before the text, a specific relationship with risk. Not recklessness exactly. More like a very high tolerance for the gap between what's technically permissible and what's clearly wrong. He'd bent small things before. Expenses that were probably personal submitted as business. Client presentation that used research he'd pulled from another firm's public report without attribution. Small things. The kind of things you'd noticed and filed away as Connor being Connor without letting them reach critical mass. You wonder now if those small things were calibration. Testing the edge. Seeing what would get flagged and what wouldn't. The company, Harbor Bridge Consulting, was set up 2 years and 3 months ago. You can trace that back now. That period overlaps exactly with when Connor started being busy with external stuff. It overlaps with the plateau year when the agency's growth slowed. In retrospect, Connor decided that Beacon's legitimate growth wasn't going to give him what he wanted fast enough, so he built a second revenue stream using Beacon's existing assets. Your clients. Your relationships. Your brand's trust. Running it all through a different name so you'd never see it. The thing that gets you, the thing that genuinely keeps you awake in a specific way, is that he was good to your face. Not fake nice in a way you can now recognize as performance. Just normal. Partnership normal. With beers on Fridays sometimes. Some honest conversations about the business. You two had a real argument in March of the previous year about whether to take on a certain client, an argument you'd both been direct about and then resolved and moved on from. That's what a real partnership argument looks like. And he was running this the whole time. That's the part that takes the longest to make sense of. Not the fraud, something you can trace and document and eventually address. It's the normal Friday afternoons. That's the thing that sits in you. You have a decision to make on that Saturday morning. You could confront Connor immediately, call him, tell him you know about HBC, see how he reacts. That's the instinct. That's what the part of you that's livid wants to do. But the operator in you, the system's brain, knows that confronting him before you know the full scope of what's been happening is a mistake. Because if he knows you know, he can move money, alter records, get ahead of the evidence. You need to know the full picture before he knows you're looking. So you don't confront him. You go to work Monday as normal. You have 3 client calls that week. You do your job. You sit in the same office as your business partner and you have normal conversations and you say nothing. That takes a specific kind of composure that doesn't come naturally. You manage it. You manage it for 9 weeks. Week 1, you hire an attorney. Not an employment attorney, a business litigation attorney named Michael Reeves, referred by a client of yours who'd been through a partnership dispute 2 years earlier. Michael is the kind of lawyer who listens carefully, asks 3 precise questions, and then gives you a numbered list of next steps with no editorializing. You appreciate that enormously right now. He tells you the priority is establishing scope before action. He says, we need to know what we're actually dealing with before you say or do anything that puts him on alert. Week 2, you reach out to 4 of your clients directly. Not about Connor, just standard relationship check-in calls, the kind you do periodically anyway. During each call, you ask a version of the same question framed innocuously. Are there any other vendors or consultants you're working with alongside us that we should be aware of for coordination purposes? 3 of the 4 say no. The 4th, a logistics company in the Midwest called Riverfield, pauses and says, you mean besides the advisory thing Connor has us on? Besides. The word besides implies you already knew. It implies it's a parallel engagement, not an either-or. It implies Riverfield has a relationship with HBC that they assumed you were aware of. You say, right, yes, just making sure we're all aligned. You end the call. You add Riverfield to the list. You log the call with time and content. Week 3, Michael Reeves brings in a forensic accountant named Denise Graham. This is the move that changes the scope of what you're looking at and not in a direction you were fully prepared for. Denise Graham has been doing forensic accounting for business fraud cases for 16 years. She is, in Michael Reeves' words, the person you want when you need to know exactly where the money went. You give her access to Beacon's full financial records, every invoice, every bank statement, every expense report, everything from the past 3 years. You also give her the state registry filing for HBC and the phone screenshot. She says she'll have a preliminary finding in 3 weeks. In the meantime, you're still gonna work. Still sitting across the office from Connor. He seems normal. No sign that he suspects anything. The drunk text went to the wrong number and the wrong number reply ended the thread and he probably thinks it was a genuine misdial. You have 3 more standard weeks of normal. You use them to document everything you can about the client relationships Connor manages, who calls, what's discussed, which clients he interfaces with directly. You're building context. You're building the picture. Denise's preliminary report arrives in week 6. 17 pages. She calls you before she sends it. She says, I want to walk you through the headline number before you read the details because the details are dense and I don't want the number to land without context. She says, based on what I've been able to trace from the HBC registration date to now, and this is conservative because I'm only counting what I can fully document, Harbor Bridge Consulting has generated approximately $380,000 in revenue over 26 months. $380,000 over 26 months. From clients that are yours. In a company that has your partner's name on it and your client's names in it and your company's relationship capital funding it. You say, how many clients? She says, I've identified 9 with a high degree of confidence. There may be more. 9 clients. Out of 22. More than a third of your roster. Running parallel billing for 2 years and 2 months. Denise also finds something else. Something that Michael Reeves says makes the case significantly stronger. In year 2 of Beacon, Connor had negotiated your standard contract with several clients. The contracts included a provision, standard boilerplate, that prohibited clients from engaging other vendors offering substantially similar services without written notice to Beacon. The provision was there to protect both of you from clients cherry-picking your service while shopping it elsewhere. Connor had negotiated it and you'd both signed off on including it. The services HBC was billing for were substantially similar to what Beacon provided. Which means HBC's operation wasn't just morally wrong, it was a contractual breach that Beacon had claims under. Connor had written the provision that helped catch him. Week 9. Michael is ready. Denise is ready. The documentation, Denise's report, the state registry filing, the client call logs, the phone screenshot with timestamp is organized into a clean evidence folder. You're ready. As ready as you're going to get for something you've never done before and never wanted to do. You call a Monday morning meeting with Connor. Standard business meeting, weekly ops review, the kind of thing you do every other Monday. Nothing unusual about the invitation. Connor shows up at 9 a.m. with coffee. He's in a good mood. He tells you he had a good weekend. You say, "Good to hear," and you gesture to the chair across from you, and Michael Reeves sits down at the end of the table. Connor looks at Michael. He doesn't know Michael. And you watch his expression process this unfamiliar person in a business meeting, attorney energy, and you watch the first hairline crack appear in his composure. Just a hairline. He's good, Connor. But he keeps his face relatively calm. He says, "Who's this? Who's..." You say, "This is my attorney. I want to talk about Harbor Bridge Consulting." What follows is about 90 minutes. I want to give you the shape of it rather than a transcript because the shape is what matters. Phase 1, about 20 minutes, is denial. Connor denies knowledge of HBC, then admits he knows what it is but denies wrongdoing. Then says it's a separate personal project, nothing to do with Beacon. Michael puts Denise's report on the table. Michael puts the client billing cross-reference on the table. Michael doesn't raise his voice. He just puts things on the table, one at a time, methodically. The denial starts to hollow out. Phase 2, about 40 minutes, is the negotiation position. Connor's posture changes. He shifts into a different mode. "Let's figure out what's fair here. There's a way to handle this between us. I can make this right. We don't need lawyers." He's trying to get ahead of the legal process by proposing a private resolution before it can be formalized. Michael says the partnership agreement requires full disclosure of conflicts of interest. The client contracts prohibit competing engagements. The documented revenue from HBC constitutes a material breach of both. We're past private resolution. Connor looks at you when Michael says this. Not at Michael. At you? You say, "This isn't personal. This is the company. That's all." Connor looks away. Phase 3, the last 30 minutes, is the terms. Michael outlines what you're seeking. Dissolution of the partnership under the fraud provision of your partnership agreement, which voids Connor's buyout rights. Full accounting of HBC revenue with documentation to be provided within 30 days. Restitution of 75% of identified HBC revenue as damages to Beacon, payable over 24 months. A non-compete clause covering all current Beacon clients for 5 years. Non-disclosure regarding the terms of dissolution. The alternative, Michael explains, is a civil fraud lawsuit and a formal complaint to the state bar regarding Dennis. Wait, no, wrong story. The alternative is a civil suit naming Connor and HBC, with the full evidence package submitted to the court and to the clients affected. Public. Documented. Permanent. Connor asks for a day to consider. Michael says 24 hours. Connor leaves. It's like the door closes. The room is very quiet for a moment. Michael looks at you. He says, "That went well." In lawyer terms, that went well means he didn't flip the table and he's going to take the deal. He takes the deal. 22 hours later, through his own attorney, who he'd apparently called at 9 p.m. the previous night. Calmly, Connor's stake in Beacon is dissolved. No buyout. The fraud provision in the partnership agreement, which you'd written together in year 1, which you'd both signed off on as boilerplate, which neither of you had ever expected to use, meant that documented fraud voided his equity rights. He walked away from a business he'd helped build for 5 years with a monthly payment obligation and a non-compete. Prison. Not bankruptcy. But also not the agency he'd been using as his personal revenue source. That's gone. The clients who'd been billed by HBC were told, carefully with Michael's guidance on the language, that there'd been an unauthorized billing issue with a former contractor and that they'd be receiving credit adjustments. Most of them were confused. Few were angry. 2 left. The rest stayed. The ones who stayed you kept. The ones who left you can't blame. Where things actually are, Beacon is smaller now. You lost 2 clients and you lost a co-founder, which means you're doing the sales role you'd always left to Connor and you're finding out you're not bad at it. Slower than him, and more careful. But the deals you close stay closed. You hired 2 people in the months after the dissolution. One of them, a woman named Jamie who handles the client relationships Connor used to manage, is genuinely better with clients than Connor was. Which tells you something about how much of the agency's success was Connor and how much was the system underneath him. The system is still there. The system is yours. You don't think about Connor constantly. You think about him more than you'd like, which is probably normal for someone who spent 5 years building something with a person who was running a parallel version of it. You wonder sometimes what the real version of Connor thought he was doing, if he had a story that made it feel justified, a narrative where he was undervalued or underpaid or somehow owed more than the equal split you'd had from day one. You'll never know. And honestly, you don't need to. The drunk text from the wrong phone was sent at 11:23 p.m. on a Friday. It was meant for someone at HBC, probably an operations contact who knew about the Meridian account. Connor had 2 phones, his personal one and apparently a dedicated HBC line that he'd never mentioned. He was using the wrong one that night because he was a bit drunk and in a good mood about a renewal. You know the feeling of being in a good mood about a client renewal. It's a good feeling. You just didn't know there were 2 versions of it happening under your roof. $380,000 over 26 months. 1 drunk text. 9 weeks of work. The math on that week rate is the best your system's brain has ever run. Here's the thing I keep coming back to about this story, and I want your take because I genuinely don't have a clean answer. The drunk text. The wrong phone. The whole thing unravels because Connor was celebrating a win at 11:23 p.m. and texted the wrong number. 2 years of a carefully constructed parallel operation, and it ends because of the most human possible mistake. Here's what that tells me, or at least what I think it tells me. The bigger something is that you're hiding, the more maintenance it takes. And the more maintenance it takes, the more chances there are for something small to go wrong. Connor ran HBC for 2 years without a single obvious slip. And then he had a good week and relaxed for 1 Friday night, and that was enough. The complexity of the thing he'd built, 2 phones, 2 companies, 9 client relationships managed on parallel tracks, that complexity was the thing that eventually caught him. Here's the question for you. If that text hadn't come, if Connor had checked the number first, if it had gone to the right person, how long before you'd have noticed on your own? Or would you? That's the thing that sits with me. Justice. The fragility of the evidence that made the justice possible. 1 Friday night. 1 drink too many. 1 glance at the wrong contact name. Would you have done? When the text came in, would you have opened it or left it alone? Drop it below. And if you've ever had a business partner, this is the one I want to hear from you on. I'm in the comments for the first 2 hours. Every comment. Subscribe if this one hit different. Thursday. New story. Second person. You're always the man it happened to. These are the stories nobody planned to tell. That's why they feel the way they do.